In May 1940, Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and asked for something that sounded insane: 50,000 aircraft in a single year. At the time, the United States military had fewer than 3,000 planes total. Germany was conquering Europe with a war machine years in the making, and Roosevelt wanted America to build 50,000 aircraft from scratch in 12 months. Adolf Hitler's advisors brought him the news. They reportedly dismissed it as American propaganda, a fantasy cooked up for domestic consumption. After all, they'd studied the numbers. In 1939, U.S. military aircraft production had been just 921 planes. The Americans, Hitler believed, were a soft people, decadent, mongrelized, incapable of the discipline required for total war. He would be proven catastrophically wrong. By the end of World War II, American factories didn't produce 50,000 aircraft. They produced 300,000, not in a year, in total. But the rate of acceleration is what matters. By 1944, the United States was building nearly 100,000 planes annually. In a single year, America built more aircraft than Japan produced during the entire war. And that was just planes. American factories also churned out 86,000 tanks, 2 million army trucks, and enough ammunition to darken the sky over 2 continents. But here's the part that rarely makes it into history books. When the last bomb fell, when the parades ended, when the soldiers came home, something strange happened. Or rather, something strange didn't happen. The factories never closed. To understand how America pulled off the most dramatic industrial mobilization in human history, you have to understand what came before. And what came before was remarkably little. In 1939, the United States Army ranked 39th in the world. 39th, behind Portugal. The cavalry still used horses to pull artillery. General George Marshall told Roosevelt that if Germany landed 5 divisions on American soil, there would be nothing the U.S. Army could do to stop them. America was not a military power. It was a sleeping giant with no alarm clock. But America was something else, the world's largest industrial economy. Decades of assembly line innovation, pioneered by men like Henry Ford, had created manufacturing capabilities that existed nowhere else on Earth. American workers could mass-produce automobiles at rates that seemed like science fiction to European craftsmen. The question was whether those same techniques could build weapons of war. The answer came from an unlikely source. In January 1941, the U.S. government asked Ford Motor Company to manufacture components for the B-24 Liberator bomber. Charles Sorensen, Ford's vice president of production, flew to San Diego to tour Consolidated Aircraft's factory. What he saw horrified him. Workers were building planes by hand, custom-fitting each piece. Final assembly happened outdoors in the California sun, on temporary fixtures that warped in the heat. No 2 aircraft came out exactly alike. Consolidated was building about 1 bomber per day. Sorensen, who had spent 4 decades perfecting mass production at Ford, saw a process that belonged in the 19th century. That night, in his hotel room, Sorensen sketched something on Coronado Hotel notepaper. A single factory, a mile long. Assembly lines running end to end, bombers built like Model Ts with standardized parts and specialized stations. He showed the sketch to Edsel Ford at breakfast. Then he made his pitch to the government. Ford wouldn't just build parts for the B-24. Ford would build complete aircraft. And they would build 1 bomber per hour. The established aircraft manufacturers laughed. Dutch Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, reportedly said, "You can't expect a blacksmith to make a watch overnight." The press called Sorensen's promise absurd. Even Roosevelt, when he saw an early B-24, called it a dreadful-looking object. Sorensen built the factory anyway, Willow Run. The name came from a creek that ran through Henry Ford's farmland near Ypsilanti, Michigan. Construction began in April 1941. The main building stretched over 3 million square feet. The assembly line was so long that halfway through it made a 90-degree turn, with massive turntables rotating bombers around the bend. The architect, Albert Kahn, boasted it would be the most enormous room in the history of man. If you want to see how this factory changed the war and the world forever, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Because what happened next proved every skeptic wrong. Back to Willow Run. At first, it was a disaster. The early months at Willow Run were chaos. Ford's engineers had no blueprints to work from. Consolidated sent them sketches, drawings, and templates. Nothing suitable for mass production. Ford dispatched 200 engineers to work around the clock, 7 days a week, translating those rough plans into precise specifications. They produced 5 miles of drawings per day, and 10,000 of those drawings were obsolete by the time they got back from San Diego because Consolidated kept changing the aircraft design. The media, watching the struggles, started calling the plant Will It Run? Senator Harry Truman launched an investigation. Production in the first months was pathetically low. 1 plane a month in October 1942. Critics said Ford had bitten off more than it could chew. Then something clicked. Ford stopped trying to keep up with Consolidated's constant changes. They froze the design. pushed modifications to field service centers, and focused on one thing: building identical bombers as fast as humanly possible. The breakthrough came in the center wing section. Consolidated had been building each wing with its own temporary jig, a process requiring 250 man-hours. Ford built a permanent jig. Wings could be moved in and out by overhead crane. Ford's method required 1 man-hour. 1. By mid-1944, Willow Run was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, 428 bombers in April alone. At one point, 100 completed aircraft flew away in just 3 days. The Army actually told Ford to slow down. "We have no place to park them," they said. "The losses in combat haven't been what we expected." Willow Run was building planes faster than the Germans could shoot them down. By war's end, Ford had pushed 865 B-24 bombers out those doors, more than 92 million pounds of airplanes. And Willow Run wasn't even the most impressive example. If Willow Run showed what could be done with aircraft, Henry Kaiser showed what could be done with ships. Kaiser had never built a ship before the war. He'd made his fortune constructing dams, Hoover, Bonneville, Grand Coulee. But when Britain desperately needed cargo vessels to replace those being sunk by German U-boats, Kaiser saw opportunity. He adapted the same mass production principles that had worked for Ford: modular construction, welding instead of riveting, standardized parts prefabricated across the country and shipped to his yards for assembly. The first Liberty ship took 131 days to build. Within 2 years, Kaiser's workers were averaging 42 days. They were completing 3 ships every single day across his 7 shipyards. And then, in November 1942, Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 2 decided to make a point. The SS Robert E. Peary. Keel laid on Sunday, November 8th. Launched on Thursday, November 12th. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from start to finish. A 441-foot cargo ship, capable of carrying 18 million pounds of jeeps or tanks or ammunition, built in less time than most people take to paint a house. The previous record had been 10 days. In total, American shipyards built 710 Liberty ships during the war. Kaiser alone produced more than 1/500 of them. When German U-boats sank Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, America simply built faster. By autumn 1943, every Allied ship sunk since 1939 had been replaced. Germany was losing the tonnage war not through naval superiority, but through industrial annihilation. These production miracles didn't happen because American workers were inherently superior. They happened because America did something unprecedented. It mobilized its entire civilian economy for war. In January 1942, Roosevelt ordered the establishment of the War Production Board. Automobile factories stopped making cars completely. Not a single civilian automobile was produced in the United States from February 1942 until the war ended. Refrigerator plants started building machine guns. A company that made corsets began manufacturing grenade belts. Typewriter factories churned out rifles. The conversion was total, and the workforce transformed too. Before the war, fewer than 12 million American women worked outside the home. By 1944, that number had jumped to 20 million, a 57% increase in 4 years. 6 million of those women took factory jobs, building the planes and ships and tanks that their husbands and brothers and sons would use on the front lines. At Willow Run, women made up 1/3 of the workforce at peak production. They earned 85 cents an hour, the same as men doing the same jobs. A former waitress named Rose Will-Monroe became famous when she was filmed riveting B-24 bombers. Her work so impressive that she became the model for Rosie the Riveter, the most enduring symbol of American home front labor. African Americans, previously excluded from many industrial jobs, found work in the shipyards and factories. Kaiser hired them in large numbers when other companies refused. At his Richmond yards, black and white workers built ships side by side. It wasn't equality, not by a long shot, but it was a crack in the wall. The result was production on a scale that beggared imagination. American industry provided almost 2/3 of all Allied military equipment during the war, not just for American forces, for everyone. Britain flew American planes. The Soviet Union drove American trucks. The Lend-Lease program shipped 14,000 aircraft to Russia alone. American factories were arming the entire Allied coalition. Hitler's dismissal of American production as propaganda wasn't just wrong, it was delusional. In 1940, he told the German people that an American intervention by mass deliveries of planes and war materials will not change the outcome of the war. By 1944, American bombers were reducing German cities to rubble around the clock. The British bombed by night, the Americans bombed by day. German industrial production, despite heroic efforts by Albert Speer to disperse and protect factories, couldn't keep pace with the destruction. The numbers tell the story. Germany produced about 113 Zero aircraft during the entire war. Japan produced around 76 Zero. Combined, the Axis powers manufactured roughly 158 Zero military aircraft. The United States alone produced 300 Zero. American output exceeded Britain and the Soviet Union combined. And unlike German factories, which were being systematically destroyed by the air campaigns American production had made possible, American factories operated in complete safety. Not a single bomb fell on Willow Run. No U-boat torpedoed Kaiser's Richmond shipyards. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans provided a barrier that no German planner had adequately accounted for. By 1944, the outcome was inevitable. Germany was fighting the most productive economy in human history, an economy that could replace every plane lost, every ship sunk, every tank destroyed, and still have capacity left over to arm its allies. Hitler had gambled that America was too soft, too divided, too distant to matter. He lost that bet with everything he had. And then the war ended. On August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered. The greatest industrial mobilization in history had achieved its purpose. American production had drowned the Axis powers in steel and explosives. Surely, now the factories would close, the soldiers would come home, America would return to peacetime. That's not what happened. For the first time in American history, the United States did not demobilize after a major war. Previous conflicts had seen rapid drawdowns. After World War I, the Army shrank from 4 million men to barely 200,000 within 2 years. Factories that had built artillery went back to making farm equipment. But in 1945, something was different. Thinkers inside the Truman administration looked at the world and saw a new threat: the Soviet Union, communism, an iron curtain descending across Europe. And they made a decision that would reshape American society forever. We're going to keep this system in place. The arsenal of democracy didn't close, it evolved. Government contracts continued flowing to defense manufacturers. The partnerships forged during the war between military brass and industrial executives became permanent fixtures of American life. Companies that had built B-24s pivoted to building jet fighters. Shipyards that had launched Liberty ships started constructing submarines and aircraft carriers. In 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander who had won the war in Europe, gave a farewell address to the nation. In it, he warned about something that hadn't existed before 1940. The conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry. He called it the Military-Industrial Complex. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, Eisenhower said, whether sought or unsought. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. That speech was more than 60 years ago. The factories Eisenhower worried about are still running. In 2024, the United States spent nearly $1 trillion on defense. That's more than the next 12 countries combined. The Pentagon's budget exceeds the GDP of most nations. Defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, companies whose roots trace directly back to World War II production, remain among the largest and most politically influential corporations in America. The relationship between government and industry that Sorensen pioneered at Willow Run, the one that Kaiser perfected in his shipyards, has become the permanent structure of American power. Military officers retire into defense contractor boardrooms. Contractor executives rotate into Pentagon positions. Members of Congress vote for weapon systems built in their districts, regardless of whether the military actually needs them. In 1940, about 40% of the American labor force worked in manufacturing. Today, it's closer to 8%. The broad industrial base that made the wartime production miracle possible has largely vanished, shipped overseas, or automated out of existence. When the United States needed to supply Ukraine with ammunition in 2022, Pentagon officials discovered something alarming. The production lines for key munitions had 18-month wait times. The arsenal of democracy had become surprisingly brittle, but the spending continues. The contracts keep flowing. The factories, or what remains of them, never close. Hitler was wrong about American production. That much is obvious. But there's a deeper irony that the standard telling of this story usually misses. The Nazi war economy was designed to be temporary. Hitler expected short, decisive campaigns. He didn't gear Germany for a war of attrition because he didn't plan to fight one. When the war dragged on, German industry struggled to catch up, constrained by resource shortages and Allied bombing. America's war economy was also supposed to be temporary. Build the weapons, win the war, go home. That was the deal Roosevelt made with the American people. But the system proved too useful to dismantle, too profitable for the corporations, too politically convenient for the politicians, too intertwined with American identity itself. The temporary became permanent. Those factory floors that built B-24s and Liberty ships, the partnerships between government and industry, the assumption that America must always be ready to outproduce any enemy. All of it crystallized into permanent policy. The emergency became the norm. Hitler called it propaganda. He built his 1,000-year Reich on conquest and collapsed in 12. America built its production system in 5 years and kept it running for 80. The factories never closed. And whether that's triumph or tragedy depends entirely on what you think they should be building now.